When 13-year-old Amara Jackson walked into her history classroom that Monday morning, she had no idea her life was about to change forever. Her braids bounced against her shoulders as she slid into her seat, the beads at the ends clicking softly. She'd spent the entire weekend getting her hair done, sitting patiently for 8 hours while her mother's skilled fingers wove the intricate pattern. The style was a birthday gift. Amara had turned 13 just 3 days earlier. The colorful beads had been her choice, a small rebellion against the strict dress code at Westfield Academy, but technically within the rules. Nothing in the handbook explicitly banned beads. Mrs. Peterson, the history teacher, was already writing on the whiteboard when Amara settled in. The woman paused, marker suspended midair, her back stiffening at the gentle click-clack of Amara's beads. She turned slowly, her gaze narrowing as it landed on Amara's hair. The classroom fell silent as Mrs. Peterson approached, her heels echoing against the linoleum floor. "Miss Jackson," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "What is that in your hair?" Amara's hand instinctively reached up, fingers grazing the smooth surface of a bead. "They're just decorations, Mrs. Peterson." "They're a distraction," Mrs. Peterson replied, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The noise is unacceptable." Amara sat up straighter. "I'll be careful not to move too much." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Peterson was known for her strict enforcement of rules, real or imagined, but everyone could feel that this was different. There was something personal in the way she stared at Amara's braids, something that made the air in the room feel heavy. "That's not good enough," Mrs. Peterson said, placing her hands on Amara's desk and leaning forward. "The dress code clearly states that hairstyles should not be distracting, but the handbook doesn't say anything about beads specifically." Amara countered, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd read the dress code multiple times before choosing her style. She was always careful not to break the rules. Mrs. Peterson's eyes flashed. "Are you arguing with me, Miss Jackson?" Before Amara could respond, Mrs. Peterson straightened up and addressed the class. "Everyone, open your textbooks to page 218. Miss Jackson, come with me to the principal's office." The walk down the empty hallway felt endless. Amara's heart hammered in her chest as she followed Mrs. Peterson, the teacher's back rigid with barely contained anger. They bypassed the principal's office entirely, heading instead to the nurse's station. Confusion and dread mingled in Amara's stomach as Mrs. Peterson ushered her inside. The school nurse, Mrs. Winters, looked up from her desk with a frown. "Can I help you?" "Miss Jackson's hair is in violation of the dress code," Mrs. Peterson stated flatly. "I need a pair of scissors." The words hung in the air for a moment before Amara fully processed them. "Scissors," she repeated, her voice cracking. Mrs. Winters hesitated, looking between Amara and Mrs. Peterson. "I don't think—" "The dress code clearly states that hairstyles should not be distracting," Mrs. Peterson interrupted. "Her beads are disrupting my classroom. Either the beads come out now or the hair does." "I can take the beads out," Amara said quickly, her hands already moving to her hair. "Please, I can undo them right now." Mrs. Peterson shook her head. "You've been given multiple warnings about your hair this semester." "No, I haven't," Amara protested, panic rising in her throat. "This is the first time." "Enough!" Mrs. Peterson snapped. "Your attitude is exactly the problem. You clearly need to learn that actions have consequences." Mrs. Winters still looked uncertain. "Shouldn't we call her parents first?" "This is a disciplinary matter," Mrs. Peterson insisted. "The handbook gives us discretion to address dress code violations immediately." She turned to Amara. "Your choice, Miss Jackson. Either I remove the beads right now, and I can't guarantee I won't damage your braids in the process, or we solve the problem permanently." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't cut my hair," she whispered. "My mom spent all weekend." "Scissors," Mrs. Peterson repeated, holding her hand out to Mrs. Winters. What happened next occurred in a blur. Mrs. Winters reluctantly handed over a pair of medical scissors. Amara tried to back away, but Mrs. Peterson grabbed her arm, forcing her into a chair. Despite Amara's protests, despite her tears and pleas, Mrs. Peterson began cutting, not just removing the beads or trimming the ends of the braids, but cutting the braids off entirely, close to Amara's scalp. Chunks of hair fell to the floor as Amara sobbed, her hands covering her face. Mrs. Winters stood frozen in shock, torn between intervening and following the chain of command. By the time she snapped out of it and tried to stop Mrs. Peterson, the damage was already done. Amara's head was a patchy mess, her beautiful braids reduced to uneven tufts. "Now you'll think twice before breaking the rules," Mrs. Peterson said, setting the scissors down. Her voice was calm, as if she'd just finished grading a paper, rather than violating a child. Amara couldn't speak. She sat trembling, tears streaming down her face, unable to process what had just happened. Mrs. Winters quickly wrapped a scarf around Amara's head and led her to a private room where she called the principal and Amara's mother. By lunchtime, the story had spread throughout the school. Students whispered in hallways, some outraged, others simply shocked that a teacher would go so far. When Amara's mother, Diana Jackson, arrived at the school, her face was a mask of controlled fury. She found her daughter curled up on a cot in the nurse's office, still wearing the scarf, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Baby," Diana whispered, gathering Amara into her arms. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Amara clung to her mother, fresh tears spilling. "She said I was breaking the rules, Mom, but I wasn't. I checked the handbook, I swear I did." "I know, baby." Diana stroked her daughter's back, her own eyes filling with tears. "This isn't about rules. This was never about rules." Principal Warner was waiting in his office when Diana and Amara arrived. He looked uncomfortable, his hands folded neatly on his desk as if to keep them from fidgeting. Mrs. Peterson sat in a chair to his right, her posture rigid, expression unrepentant. "Mrs. Jackson," Principal Warner began, "I want to express my deepest—" "Save it," Diana cut him off, her voice ice cold. "I want to know exactly what gave this woman the right to assault my daughter." Mrs. Peterson straightened in her chair. "It was a disciplinary action, not assault. Amara's hair was in violation of—" "My daughter's name is Miss Jackson to you," Diana interrupted. "And you will show me exactly where in the handbook it says teachers are authorized to physically restrain students and cut off their hair." Principal Warner cleared his throat. "Mrs. Peterson acted without authorization. The school does not condone. Yet here she sits," Diana pointed out, "still employed, still defending her actions. Tell me, if my daughter had cut off a chunk of Mrs. Peterson's hair, would you be so understanding? Or would she be expelled and facing criminal charges?" The room fell silent. Amara watched her mother with a mixture of awe and lingering fear. Diana Jackson had always been a force to be reckoned with, a successful corporate attorney who had never lost a case, but seeing her in action was something else entirely. "Mrs. Jackson," Principal Warner tried again, "I assure you that appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. We're prepared to offer." "I don't want your assurances," Diana said. "I want justice, and if you can't provide it, I know someone who will." With that, Diana took out her phone and made a call. "James," she said when the line connected, "I need you to come to Westfield Academy right now. It's Amara." She paused, listening. "Yes, she's physically safe, but—" Her voice broke slightly. "Just come. Now." 20 minutes later, Brigadier General James Jackson strode into the principal's office. He was still in his full dress uniform, having come straight from a meeting at the Pentagon. His face was a study in controlled rage as he took in the scene. His daughter, scarf wrapped around her head, eyes red from crying. His wife, standing protectively at Amara's side, and the school officials, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "What happened?" he asked, his deep voice filling the room. Diana gestured for Amara to remove the scarf. General Jackson's breath caught as he saw what remained of his daughter's hair. He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling in front of Amara's chair to examine the damage more closely. His large hands were gentle as they cradled his daughter's face. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. Amara's eyes flickered toward Mrs. Peterson, who had the good sense to look nervous for the first time. General Jackson rose to his full height, turning slowly to face the teacher. "You put your hands on my child?" The question was quiet, controlled, but laced with a danger that made everyone in the room tense. "General Jackson," Principal Warner interjected, "I understand your distress, but I assure you—" "You assured my wife that appropriate action would be taken," General Jackson cut him off. "I'd like to know what that action is specifically." Principal Warner swallowed hard. "Mrs. Peterson has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation." "Administrative leave," General Jackson repeated. "Paid?" The principal's silence was answer enough. "Let me make something perfectly clear," General Jackson said, his voice steady but intense. "What happened here today wasn't a disciplinary action. It was assault. It was humiliation. It was discrimination. And if you think a paid vacation is an appropriate response, you're sorely mistaken." Mrs. Peterson finally spoke up. "With all due respect, General, you're overreacting. This was a simple dress code violation that—" "Simple?" Diana interrupted. "You physically restrained my 13-year-old daughter and cut off her hair against her will. There is nothing simple about that. The handbook gives teachers discretion," Mrs. Peterson began. "Show me," General Jackson demanded. "Show me exactly where it says teachers can cut a student's hair." Mrs. Peterson faltered, looking to Principal Warner for support. He averted his gaze. "That's what I thought," General Jackson said. He turned to his wife and daughter. "We're leaving. Now." As they reached the door, he paused, looking back at the principal. "By this time tomorrow, I expect Mrs. Peterson to be terminated. I expect a formal apology from this institution, and I expect a full review of your dress code policies with specific attention to how they're enforced against students of color." His eyes narrowed. "If these expectations aren't met, the next people walking through that door will be our attorneys, followed closely by the media and civil rights organizations I have on speed dial." The threat hung in the air as the Jackson family left the office. In the parking lot, Amara finally broke down completely, collapsing into her father's arms. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she sobbed. "I didn't think the beads would be a problem. I checked the rules, I swear." General Jackson held his daughter close, his military composure cracking as he kissed the top of her head. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. Nothing at all." "She's right," Diana said, joining the embrace. "This isn't your fault, Amara, and we're going to make sure everyone knows that." As they drove home, Amara huddled in the back seat, staring out the window. Her reflection in the glass was a stranger's, the beaded braids that had made her feel so proud now gone, leaving only uneven patches and the lingering sting of humiliation. In the front seat, General Jackson made call after call, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. Diana sat beside him, her own phone pressed to her ear, speaking in clipped, precise terms that Amara recognized as her courtroom voice. Amara closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since Mrs. Peterson had led her from the classroom, she felt a flicker of something other than fear and shame. Her parents were fighting for her, and they weren't going to stop until they'd won. The Jackson home was usually filled with laughter and music, but that evening a heavy silence hung in the air. Amara sat on a stool in her parents' bathroom, staring at her reflection, as Diana gently worked to even out what remained of her hair. Tears slid silently down Amara's cheeks as more hair fell to the floor. "I know it hurts, baby," Diana murmured, her own eyes glistening. "But we're going to make it better." In the hallway, General Jackson paced back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low and controlled, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his rage. "No, Senator, this isn't something that can wait until morning. Yes, I understand you're at dinner. I wouldn't call if it weren't important." He paused, listening. "My daughter was assaulted by a teacher today, physically restrained and had her hair cut off against her will." Another pause. "Yes, Senator, at Westfield Academy, the same school your granddaughter attends." The conversation continued as Diana finished her work. She stepped back, examining Amara's head critically before offering a sad smile. "It's not perfect, but it's even now," she said, running her hand over the short, curly fuzz that remained. "We can go to Ms. Patrice tomorrow. She'll know how to style it beautifully." Amara touched her head hesitantly, fingers exploring the unfamiliar texture. "I look like a boy," she whispered, fresh tears welling. Diana knelt in front of her daughter, taking Amara's hands in hers. "You look like a warrior," she corrected. "Like those women in that movie you love, the King's Guard from Wakanda. Remember how fierce they were?" A ghost of a smile flickered across Amara's face. "The Dora Milaje." "Exactly," Diana said, squeezing her hands. "And tomorrow, we're going to war." General Jackson appeared in the doorway, his expression softening as he looked at his daughter. "How are my two favorite women doing?" "We're battle-ready," Diana replied, standing up and wrapping an arm around Amara's shoulders. He nodded approvingly. "Good, because we have reinforcements arriving." He checked his watch. "The first wave should be here in about 30 minutes. Amara looked up in confusion. "Who's coming?" "Aunt Vivian, for starters," he said, referring to his sister, a prominent civil rights attorney. "And your Uncle Marcus." Marcus Wilson was Diana's brother, a journalist for the Washington Post. "Daddy," Amara said, her voice small, "I don't want everyone to see me like this." General Jackson crossed the room and knelt beside his daughter, eye to eye. "Amara Nichelle Jackson," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have nothing, absolutely nothing, to be ashamed of. What happened today wasn't your fault. And hiding away won't help you heal, nor will it prevent this from happening to another child." "Your father's right," Diana added. "What Mrs. Peterson did was wrong, not just morally wrong, but legally wrong, and the school's response so far suggests they don't fully understand that yet." Amara nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "Okay," she said finally. "But can I at least wear my purple head wrap?" Diana smiled. "Of course you can." By 9 o'clock that evening, the Jackson living room had transformed into a war room. Vivian Jackson Williams, the general's sister, sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop balanced on her knees as she typed furiously. Marcus Wilson paced near the window, speaking quietly into his phone. Diana and the general sat at the dining table, surrounded by papers, printouts of the school handbook, copies of relevant state laws, and pages of handwritten notes. Amara, wrapped in her favorite blanket and wearing her purple head wrap, sat quietly in the corner, watching the adults work. Despite her parents' assurances, she couldn't help feeling that she had somehow caused this chaos, that if she had just worn her hair differently, none of this would be happening. "Amara," Aunt Vivian called, looking up from her laptop. "I need your help with something." Amara moved to the couch, sitting beside her aunt. "What do you need?" "I want you to tell me everything that happened today, from the moment you walked into Mrs. Peterson's classroom. Every detail you can remember." Amara swallowed hard. "Do I have to?" Vivian placed a gentle hand on her niece's knee. Yes, sweetheart, you do. I know it's painful, but your testimony is our strongest weapon. So Amara began, haltingly at first, then with more confidence as the story unfolded. She described Mrs. Peterson's reaction to her beads, the walk to the nurse's office, the way the teacher had physically restrained her, and the feeling of the scissors against her scalp. By the time she finished, everyone in the room had stopped what they were doing to listen, and Amara was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. "You're the bravest person I know," Vivian said, pulling Amara into a fierce hug, "and I've represented political prisoners and whistleblowers." Marcus closed his notebook, his expression grim. "This is worse than I thought. The restraint alone is grounds for criminal charges." "We're well beyond administrative remedies," Vivian agreed, looking at her brother. "James, I'm filing for an emergency temporary restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. Diana, I'll need you to draft the complaint." General Jackson nodded sharply. "And I've got a meeting with the superintendent at 800. "I've already reached out to my editor," Marcus added. "We're running the story, but only with your approval, and only with Amara's identity protected if that's what you want." Diana looked at her daughter. "It's your choice, Amara. We can keep your name out of the papers, use a pseudonym." Amara was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she straightened her shoulders. "No," she said firmly. "I want people to know it was me. I want them to know my name. I didn't do anything wrong." Pride flickered across General Jackson's face. "That's my girl." The next morning, the Jackson family arrived at Westfield Academy as a united front. Amara, dressed in her school uniform with her purple head wrap arranged elegantly around her head, walked between her parents. Diana wore a crisp charcoal suit, her lawyer armor. General Jackson was again in full-dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, his presence commanding attention as they entered the building. The front office fell silent as they approached, the secretary's eyes widening in recognition. "Mr. and Mrs. Jackson," she stammered, "Principal Warner is expecting you. If you'll just—" "I'm expected by Superintendent Hayes," General Jackson corrected. "My wife and daughter will be meeting with Principal Warner." The secretary looked flustered. I don't believe the superintendent is in the building today." "He's in his office," General Jackson said flatly. "I confirmed it 20 minutes ago." Without waiting for a response, he strode past the desk, making his way toward the administrative wing. Diana and Amara followed the secretary to Principal Warner's office, where they found him waiting, looking significantly more nervous than he had the day before. "Mrs. Jackson, Amara," he greeted them, rising from his desk. "Please have a seat. I want to express again how deeply sorry I am for what occurred yesterday." Diana remained standing. "Has Mrs. Peterson been terminated?" Principal Warner cleared his throat. "She's been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, as per district policy." "That's not what my husband requested," Diana said coolly. "Mrs. Jackson, I understand your frustration, but there are procedures that must be followed. The teachers' union will be the least of your concerns when they see the lawsuit we're filing," Diana interrupted. "Assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of civil rights. Shall I continue?" Principal Warner paled. "Lawsuit? Surely we can resolve this without—" "We're well past that point, Principal Warner," Diana said. "But we're here to give you one last opportunity to do the right thing." Meanwhile, General Jackson stood in Superintendent Hayes' office, his posture rigid as he faced the older man across his desk. Superintendent Hayes was a political creature, having navigated the district's administration for over 20 years. He was unaccustomed to being confronted so directly. "General Jackson," he said, attempting to sound conciliatory, "I want to assure you that we're taking this incident very seriously. Mrs. Peterson's actions were completely unauthorized and do not reflect the values of our district. Then why is she still employed? General Jackson asked. Hayes sighed. As I'm sure you understand, there are protocols that must be followed. The teachers' union requires— I don't care what the union requires, General Jackson cut in. I care about justice for my daughter and protection for every other child in your schools. And we share that concern, Hayes insisted. But we cannot simply fire a teacher without due process, regardless of the circumstances. General Jackson leaned forward, placing his hands on the superintendent's desk. Let me be very clear, Mr. Hayes. My daughter was assaulted on your watch, in your school, by your employee. If Mrs. Peterson is not terminated by the end of the day, the story runs in tomorrow's Washington Post. If you haven't implemented district-wide cultural sensitivity training by the end of the week, I'll be speaking personally with the Secretary of Education, who, as it happens, is a close personal friend. Hayes swallowed hard. You're threatening me, General? No, sir. I'm informing you of consequences. There's a difference. Back in Principal Warner's office, Amara sat quietly as her mother outlined their demands. Immediate termination for Mrs. Peterson, a formal apology to Amara in front of the entire school, revision of the dress code to explicitly protect cultural hairstyles, and mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff. These demands are non-negotiable, Diana concluded, and we expect immediate action. Principal Warner looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Jackson, while I sympathize with your position, I'm not authorized to make these kinds of decisions unilaterally. Then I suggest you find someone who is, Diana replied, because my brother-in-law's article is scheduled to run tomorrow morning, and I promise you, the public reaction will make our demands seem reasonable by comparison. As if on cue, Amara's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down to see a text from her cousin Zoe. OMG, Amara, your video is everywhere. Frowning, Amara opened social media and felt her heart drop. Someone, likely one of the students who had witnessed her return to class in the headscarf, had posted about the incident. The post had already been shared thousands of times, with hashtags like Justice for Amara and Protect Black Girls trending. Mom, Amara said quietly, showing Diana her phone. Diana's eyes widened as she scrolled through the post and the hundreds of outraged comments. She turned back to Principal Warner, whose face had gone ashen as he looked at his own phone. It appears the court of public opinion is already in session, Diana said, her voice steady. I suggest you act quickly, Principal Warner, before this situation spirals even further out of your control. As they left the office, Amara felt a strange mix of emotions. The humiliation was still there, a dull ache beneath her head wrap, but alongside it was something new, a sense of power. People were listening. People were angry on her behalf. And maybe, just maybe, her pain would lead to protection for others. In the hallway, students stared as she passed, some offering shy smiles of support, others quickly looking away. Amara held her head high, remembering her father's words. She had nothing to be ashamed of. By the time they met General Jackson in the parking lot, his expression told them everything they needed to know. The battle had only just begun, and the Jacksons were prepared for war. By nightfall, Amara's story had exploded. What began as a social media post shared among students had transformed into a national conversation. The hashtags Justice for Amara and Protect Black Girls were trending nationwide, with celebrities, politicians, and civil rights activists all weighing in. News vans lined the street outside the Jackson home, reporters standing in the glow of camera lights as they delivered updates to a horrified public. Inside, Amara sat on the living room floor, staring at her phone in disbelief as thousands of supportive messages poured in from strangers around the country. Some shared their own stories of discrimination. Others offered words of encouragement. Many expressed outrage at Mrs. Peterson and the school administration. "I never thought so many people would care," Amara said quietly as Diana brought her a mug of hot chocolate. Diana sat beside her daughter, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "People recognize injustice when they see it, baby. And what happened to you? It touched a nerve because it's not just about hair. It's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about who gets to decide what's acceptable and what's not." In the kitchen, General Jackson was on the phone again, his voice a steady rumble as he spoke with the district's legal counsel. The conversation was tense but measured, the general laying out in precise terms exactly what he expected from the district and the consequences if those expectations weren't met. Vivian entered the living room, laptop in hand, and settled into an armchair. "Well, the temporary restraining order is in place," she announced. "Mrs. Peterson is legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Amara or communicating with her in any way." "Does that mean she can't come to school?" Amara asked. "She shouldn't be at school anyway," Diana muttered. "It means if she does show up at school, she'll be in violation of a court order," Vivian explained. "And that would mean immediate arrest." Marcus walked in from the home office, where he'd been working on his article for the Washington Post. "Just got off the phone with my editor," he said. "The story runs on the front page tomorrow." He looked at Amara. "Are you sure you're ready for that level of attention, kiddo?" Amara took a deep breath. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm more scared of what happens if we don't speak up." General Jackson joined them, his call finished. "That's my brave girl," he said, sitting beside Amara and Diana on the floor, "and you won't be facing any of this alone." The family spent the rest of the evening preparing for what was to come. Diana helped Amara craft a statement for social media, carefully worded to thank supporters while emphasizing the need for systemic change. Vivian worked on the legal filings, building a case that went beyond Amara's individual experience to address patterns of discriminatory discipline in schools across the country. Marcus finalized his article, ensuring it captured not just the outrage of the moment, but the broader context of how black children, especially girls, face disproportionate and often more severe disciplinary actions in schools. General Jackson made call after call, leveraging his considerable network to ensure the district understood the full weight of what was coming if they didn't act quickly and decisively. By the time Amara went to bed, exhausted but resolute, the family had a battle plan worthy of the general's military background. Phase 1 was already in motion. Bring public attention to the issue. Phase 2 would begin in the morning. Demand accountability. Across town, in a modest suburban home, Jennifer Peterson sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen in mounting horror. Her social media accounts had exploded with hateful messages. Her phone rang constantly with calls from unknown numbers. The local news had already run the story, featuring a school photo of Amara with her braids alongside a quote from the Jackson family's attorney, condemning Peterson's actions as a violent assault motivated by racial bias. She closed the laptop with shaking hands. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd been teaching for 23 years without incident. She was respected, even feared, but never hated. Now, overnight, she had become a villain in a story that was spinning rapidly out of her control. The worst part was that she couldn't even fully explain to herself why she'd done it. Yes, the beads had been clicking, and yes, it was distracting, but she'd had students with distracting accessories before. She'd confiscated jewelry, had students remove caps or hoodies, even sent a boy to the office once for wearing light-up sneakers that flashed with each step. But she'd never physically restrained a student. She'd never taken scissors to a child's hair. Why had she done it? The question haunted her as she poured herself another glass of wine, her third of the evening. She wasn't a racist. At least, she didn't think she was. She treated all her students the same, demanded the same excellence from each of them. But even as she tried to convince herself of this, uncomfortable memories surfaced. how she'd repeatedly confused the names of the only 2 black boys in her class last year, how she'd questioned the authenticity of an essay written by a Latina student because it was too articulate, how she'd always seemed to notice dress code violations more quickly on certain students than others. Her phone rang again, displaying the name of the teachers' union representative. She let it go to voicemail. What could they possibly say that would make this better? The union would defend her, of course. That was their job. But even they couldn't undo what she'd done. The truth, the one she was afraid to admit even to herself, was that something about Amara had always bothered her. The girl was confident, poised, articulate, never disrespectful exactly, but never cowed either. She questioned things, not in a rebellious way, but in a thoughtful manner that sometimes made Jennifer uncomfortable. And when Amara had walked in with those braids, beads clicking with each step, holding herself with such self-assurance, something had snapped. Jennifer reached for her phone and listened to the voicemail from the union rep, who informed her in clipped tones that her case was challenging and advised her not to speak to anyone, especially the media, until they'd developed a strategy. The message ended with a question Jennifer couldn't answer. What were you thinking, Jennifer? The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of voices outside her window. Peering through the curtains, she saw that the news vans had multiplied overnight. Reporters stood on the sidewalk, drinking coffee from travel mugs and checking their equipment. She quickly pulled the curtains closed again and headed to the bathroom to prepare for the day ahead. The purple head wrap had worked well enough yesterday, but today Amara wanted something different. After her shower, she stood in front of the mirror, examining the short, uneven patches of hair that remained. Ms. Patrice, their family friend and a skilled hairstylist, was coming over later, but for now, Amara was on her own. She reached for a jar of styling cream and began working it through her hair, then pulled out the collection of colorful scarves and wraps her grandmother had given her for her birthday. She selected a vibrant blue and gold pattern, arranging it carefully around her head until she was satisfied with the result. It was different from her usual style, but she had to admit it looked good, regal even. When she came downstairs, her parents were already at the dining table, reviewing papers and speaking in low, urgent tones. They looked up as she entered, both smiling at the sight of her. "That wrap is beautiful, Amara," Diana said. "You look like a queen." General Jackson nodded approvingly. "Ready for battle, soldier?" Amara squared her shoulders. "Ready, sir." Breakfast was a strategic meeting, with Vivian joining via video call to update them on the legal proceedings. The temporary restraining order was in place, and she was preparing to file a formal lawsuit against Mrs. Peterson, Principal Warner, and the entire school district. Marcus's article had gone live on the Washington Post website at 5 a.m. and was already the most read story of the day. The superintendent's office called 10 minutes ago, General Jackson reported. They want to meet this afternoon to discuss an amicable resolution. Diana raised an eyebrow. Amicable? Their word, not mine, he replied with a grim smile. I told them we'd be there at 2. Vivian will join us. What about me? Amara asked. Don't I get a say in the resolution? Diana reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. Absolutely. That's why you're coming with us. But, General Jackson added, first you have to get through the school day. Are you sure you're ready for that? Amara wasn't sure at all, but she nodded anyway. I can't hide forever, and I'm not letting Mrs. Peterson win by keeping me away from my education. The drive to school was tense, the family's SUV followed by news vans and surrounded by reporters when they pulled into the parking lot. General Jackson stepped out first, his uniform an imposing sight as he cleared a path for Diana and Amara. School security guards had formed a perimeter around the entrance, keeping the press at bay as the family approached. Principal Warner waited just inside the doors, his face a mask of professional concern. "General and Mrs. Jackson, Amara," he greeted them, his voice pitched low. "If you'll follow me, we can avoid the main hallways." "No," Amara said firmly, surprising herself as much as the principal. "I'm going to class the normal way." Principal Warner looked to her parents, clearly hoping they would overrule her, but Diana merely nodded. "You heard my daughter." "Of course," Warner said, his smile strained. "I should inform you that Mrs. Peterson is not on campus today, nor will she be for the foreseeable future." "She better not be," General Jackson said, his voice quiet but intense. "We'll see you at 2 o'clock, Principal Warner. In the meantime, I trust you'll ensure my daughter's day proceeds without incident." As they approached Amara's locker, Diana bent to kiss her daughter's forehead. "Call if you need anything at all. I can be here in 15 minutes. "I will," Amara promised. She hugged her father next, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Stand tall," he whispered. "Remember who you are." Amara watched her parents leave, then turned to face the hallway. Students were staring, whispering behind their hands, some with phones raised to capture her return. She forced herself to walk forward, head high, the blue and gold fabric of her head wrapped like a crown above her face. "Amara." The voice belonged to her best friend Zoe, who pushed through the crowd to reach her. "Oh my God, are you okay? Everyone's talking about what happened. That witch Peterson is totally going to get fired." Before Amara could respond, more of her friends surrounded her, forming a protective circle as they moved through the hallway. The support was overwhelming. Students she barely knew gave her thumbs up or nods of solidarity as she passed. Even some of the teachers stood in their doorways, offering small smiles or whispered words of encouragement. By the time she reached her first class, English with Mr. Collins, a young teacher who had always been kind, Amara felt something she hadn't expected. Pride. Not pride in what had happened, but pride in how she was handling it, in how she was refusing to be a victim. Mr. Collins greeted her warmly as she entered. "It's good to see you, Amara," he said simply, treating her normally while still acknowledging that her presence was a choice, not a given. As she took her seat, Amara noticed something on her desk, a small envelope with her name written in neat script. Inside was a card signed by every teacher in the English department, expressing their support and apologizing for what she had experienced. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. The morning passed in a blur of supportive gestures and curious stares. By lunchtime, Amara was emotionally exhausted but determined to maintain her composure. She sat with her friends in the cafeteria, picking at her food and trying to focus on their conversation rather than the whispers around her. "Amara?" A hesitant voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up to see Jessica Whitman, a quiet girl she knew from math class but had never really spoken to. Jessica shifted nervously from foot to foot, then thrust a piece of paper toward Amara. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened. Mrs. Peterson did something similar to my sister 2 years ago, not cutting her hair, but humiliating her in front of everyone because of her clothes. We didn't fight back like you're doing. I wish we had." Amara took the paper, which turned out to be a petition with dozens of signatures. "What's this?" "It's statements from students who've experienced discrimination from Mrs. Peterson," Jessica explained. "We thought it might help your case." As Amara looked at the list of names and brief descriptions of incidents, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. This was about every student who had ever been made to feel less than, every child who had been humiliated or targeted because they didn't fit someone else's idea of acceptable. She carefully folded the petition and placed it in her backpack. "Thank you," she said, her voice strong and clear. "This will definitely help." At 2 o'clock, Amara sat between her parents in the superintendent's conference room, facing a table of nervous administrators. The meeting that would determine the next chapter of her story was about to begin, and for the first time since Mrs. Peterson had cut her hair, Amara felt truly powerful. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for all of them. The conference room was designed to intimidate. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Framed awards and certificates covered the walls, silent testimonials to the district's supposed excellence. Superintendent Hayes sat at the head of the table, flanked by Principal Warner on one side and a stern-faced woman in a charcoal suit on the other, the district's attorney, Diana presumed. "Thank you for meeting with us today," Superintendent Hayes began, his tone carefully calibrated to project both authority and conciliation. "I want to begin by expressing once again our sincere regret for the incident involving Amara." "The assault," General Jackson corrected, his voice level but firm. Hayes's smile tightened. "Yes, the unfortunate physical altercation. Rest assured, we are taking this matter extremely seriously." "As evidenced by Mrs. Peterson's continued employment?" Diana asked, arching an eyebrow. The district attorney leaned forward. "Mrs. Jackson, I'm Caroline Winters, lead counsel for the district. I want to assure you that we're following established protocols for administrative leave while the investigation proceeds." "And how long will this investigation take?" Vivian asked, her legal pad already covered in notes. "We anticipate completing our internal review within 30 days, Winters replied smoothly. 30 days. General Jackson's voice remained controlled, but his eyes flashed with anger. "My daughter was assaulted on Monday. It's now Wednesday. And you need a month to determine whether physically restraining a child and cutting off her hair warrants termination?" Superintendent Hayes cleared his throat. "General Jackson, I understand your frustration, but there are procedures." "Let me stop you right there," Vivian interrupted, placing a folder on the table. "This is a copy of the lawsuit we're filing tomorrow morning. It names Mrs. Peterson as the primary defendant, but also includes Principal Warner, yourself, and the entire school district as co-defendants for fostering an environment where such an assault could occur." She slid additional copies across the table. "You'll note that we're not just alleging assault and battery, but also violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, violations of the Fourth Amendment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligent supervision." The room fell silent as the administrators flipped through the document. Principal Warner paled visibly, while Hayes maintained his composure, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Furthermore," Vivian continued, "we've collected statements from 17 other students who report experiencing discriminatory treatment from Mrs. Peterson over the past 5 years, many of them students of color. This suggests a pattern that the district either negligently failed to identify or deliberately chose to ignore." Amara reached into her backpack and pulled out the petition Jessica had given her at lunch. "There are more," she said, her voice quiet but steady as she placed it on the table. "These are just from today." Winters reached for the paper, scanning it quickly before passing it to Hayes. His frown deepened as he read. "This is the first I've heard of these other incidents," he said finally. "That's part of the problem," Diana replied. "When children report discrimination, they're not taken seriously. Their experiences are minimized or dismissed entirely. That ends now." General Jackson leaned forward, his posture commanding attention. "Here's what's going to happen. Mrs. Peterson will be terminated, not suspended, not placed on leave, terminated, by the end of business today. The district will issue a formal apology to Amara and to every other student who has experienced discrimination in your schools. You will implement mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff, and you will revise your dress code to explicitly protect cultural hairstyles." "General Jackson," Winters began, "while we appreciate your suggestions—" "These aren't suggestions, Counselor," Vivian interrupted. These are the minimum terms required to avoid litigation. And trust me when I say that a public trial is not in your best interest. Not with the media attention this case is already receiving. Hayes and Winters exchanged glances, communicating silently. Principal Warner looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Mrs. Peterson has 23 years of service to this district, Hayes said finally. The teachers' union will fight her termination, especially without a full investigation. Then let them, General Jackson replied. But she won't be employed by this district while that fight happens. Hayes sighed, rubbing his temple. I'll need to consult with the school board. Do it now, Diana said, checking her watch. My brother's follow-up article is scheduled to run in tomorrow's paper. I'd hate for it to include the district's refusal to take immediate action. The tension in the room was palpable as Hayes considered his options. Finally, he nodded to Winters, who stepped out of the room to make a call. The remaining minutes stretched in uncomfortable silence, Amara sitting tall between her parents, her eyes never leaving Hayes's face. When Winters returned, she whispered something in Hayes's ear. He closed his eyes briefly, then turned back to the Jackson family. The board has authorized me to terminate Mrs. Peterson's employment effective immediately, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. We will also issue a formal apology and begin the process of reviewing our policies regarding dress code and disciplinary actions. And the cultural sensitivity training? Vivian pressed. We'll implement a program before the end of the semester, Hayes conceded. General Jackson nodded once, satisfied but not celebratory. We'll expect written confirmation of these commitments by the end of the day. Of course, Hayes replied, his tone suggesting that the meeting was concluded. But Amara wasn't finished. What about the other students? She asked. All eyes turned to her, some surprised that she had spoken up. The ones Mrs. Peterson hurt before me, Amara clarified. Don't they deserve an apology too? Don't they deserve to know that someone believes them? Hayes looked genuinely taken aback, as if it hadn't occurred to him that this might be about more than just resolving the immediate crisis. Yes, of course. We'll review the incidents reported and reach out to the students involved. All of them, Amara insisted, not just the ones on that list. There are probably more who never spoke up. Diana squeezed her daughter's hand under the table, pride swelling in her chest. This was what real leadership looked like. Not protecting your own interests, but advocating for others who couldn't advocate for themselves. We'll do our best to identify any affected students, Hayes promised, a new note of respect in his voice as he addressed Amara directly. As they left the conference room, reporters were waiting in the lobby, having somehow caught wind of the meeting. Camera flashes erupted as they emerged, questions being shouted from all directions. General Jackson, is it true Mrs. Peterson has been fired? Amara, how are you feeling about the school's response? Mrs. Jackson, will you still be pursuing legal action against the district? General Jackson raised a hand, instantly commanding silence. My family has been in discussions with district officials regarding the assault on my daughter. We're pleased to report that Mrs. Peterson's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. Beyond that, we have no further comment at this time. As cameras continued to flash, the family made their way to their car, Diana's arm protectively around Amara's shoulders. Once inside, with the doors closed against the chaos, Amara finally allowed herself to exhale. Is it really over? She asked. General Jackson met her eyes in the rearview mirror. This part is, he said, but the work, the real work, is just beginning. That evening, as news of Mrs. Peterson's termination spread, the Jackson home became command central for what was evolving from a personal fight into a movement. Civil rights organizations reached out offering support. Parents from other schools called to share similar stories. Students from Westfield Academy and beyond sent messages of solidarity. Amara sat at the dining table, surrounded by papers covered in her neat handwriting, ideas for policy changes, notes on the experiences shared by other students, plans for a student advocacy group. Diana watched her daughter from the kitchen doorway, amazed at how Amara had transformed her pain into purpose. "You should get some rest," Diana said, bringing Amara a mug of tea. "It's been an intense few days." Amara looked up, her eyes bright with determination. "I will, Mom. I just want to finish organizing these testimonials first. Some of these kids have been dealing with this stuff for years without anyone listening." Diana sat beside her daughter, gently tucking a stray edge of the head wrap back into place. "I'm so proud of you. You know that? Most people would have just wanted to put this behind them, but you're using it to make things better for others." Amara shrugged, but couldn't hide her smile. "I learned from the best," she said, nudging her mother's shoulder. In the living room, General Jackson was on a video call with several of his military colleagues, many of whom had daughters of their own in schools across the country. They were discussing ways to leverage their collective influence to address similar issues in their communities. "What happened to Amara isn't isolated," the general was saying. "It's happening to our children everywhere, just in different forms, and it's on us to change that." The doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. Diana went to answer it, surprised to find Mrs. Winters standing on their doorstep, a thick envelope in her hands. "Mrs. Jackson," she greeted Diana, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the late hour. "I apologize for the intrusion, but Superintendent Hayes asked me to deliver this personally." Diana accepted the envelope with a raised eyebrow. "It couldn't wait until morning?" "He felt it was important to demonstrate our commitment to addressing your concerns promptly," Winters replied. She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "For what it's worth, Mrs. Jackson, not everyone in the administration was blind to Mrs. Peterson's behavior. Some of us have been trying to address it for years." "Then why didn't you?" Diana asked, genuinely curious. Winters sighed. "Bureaucracy, politics, the fear of lawsuits from the union. Take your pick." She straightened her shoulders. "But that's no excuse. What happened to your daughter should never have happened, and I'm personally committed to ensuring it doesn't happen again." Diana studied the woman's face, sensing a genuine ally beneath the professional exterior. "I'll hold you to that, counselor." After Winters left, Diana opened the envelope to find not only the written confirmation of their agreements, but also a comprehensive plan for policy review and reform, beginning with an immediate revision of the dress code to explicitly protect cultural hairstyles and expressions. She brought the documents to the dining table, where Amara was still working on her own plans. "Look at this," Diana said, spreading the papers out. "They're actually taking this seriously." Amara scanned the documents, a small smile forming. "This is a good start," she said, "but there's still so much more to do." "One battle at a time, soldier," General Jackson said, joining them at the table. "You've already accomplished more in 3 days than most people do in a lifetime." Later that night, as Diana checked on Amara before bed, she found her daughter sitting at her window, gazing out at the stars. The head wrap was gone, revealing the short, uneven curls beneath. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, Amara looked both younger and older than her 13 years, a child who had been forced to confront the harsh realities of the world, but who had emerged stronger for it. "Penny for your thoughts," Diana said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Amara turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. "I was just thinking about Mrs. Peterson," she admitted. "Do you think she knows why what she did was so wrong? Not just the cutting my hair part, but the way she saw me, the way she didn't see me?" Diana considered the question carefully. "I don't know," she said honestly. Some people never understand the harm they cause, but what matters is that you know you didn't deserve it, and now other people will be protected from experiencing the same thing. Amara nodded slowly. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I wasn't your daughter, if my dad wasn't a general, if you weren't a lawyer, if we didn't have Aunt Vivian and Uncle Marcus. Would anyone have listened to me? The question hung in the air, painful in its truth. Diana had been asking herself the same thing. That's why this can't stop with you, she said finally. That's why we have to keep fighting. For all the children who don't have generals and lawyers in their corner. Amara climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. We will, she said, her voice soft but resolute. Tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Until every kid can go to school without being afraid of who they are. Diana kissed her daughter's forehead, heart swelling with a mixture of pride and fierce determination. That's my girl. As she closed Amara's door, Diana made a silent promise, not just to her daughter, but to every child who had ever been made to feel less than, every parent who had ever fought this battle alone. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The following week brought a new normal to Westfield Academy. Students moved through hallways buzzing with conversation about Mrs. Peterson's termination, the upcoming policy changes, and most of all, Amara Jackson. She had become both a symbol and a catalyst, the girl who stood up to the system and won. For Amara herself, the attention was both empowering and overwhelming. She had always been a good student, well-liked but never the center of attention. Now, eyes followed her everywhere. Younger students approached her shyly in the cafeteria, seeking advice or simply wanting to be near the girl who had made national headlines. Teachers regarded her with a mixture of respect and wariness, conscious that she represented a shift in the power dynamic they had long taken for granted. It's weird, Amara confided to Zoe as they walked to math class. Last week I was just another student. Now everyone acts like I'm some kind of celebrity activist. Zoe adjusted her backpack, shooting a glance at two sixth graders who were pointing excitedly at Amara from across the hall. You kind of are, though. Did you see how many followers you have now? Your Instagram post about cultural hairstyles got shared by Beyoncé's stylist. Amara shook her head, still not entirely comfortable with her newfound platform. She had begun using social media to share educational content about discrimination in schools, with Diana's careful guidance on what was appropriate to post. The response had been overwhelming, with thousands of people from around the country following her accounts overnight. I just want things to get better, Amara said. Not just here, but everywhere. That's why people are listening to you, Zoe replied. You're not doing this for attention. You're doing it because it's right. As they entered the classroom, Amara noticed a new face at the teacher's desk. A young black woman with locks pulled back in a neat ponytail. She smiled warmly as students filed in. Good morning, everyone. My name is Miss Olivia Carter, and I'll be taking over your math class for the remainder of the semester. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Mrs. Peterson had taught multiple subjects, including math, and her sudden termination had left several classes without a permanent teacher. The school had been scrambling to find replacements. Ms. Carter began the lesson with an energy that immediately engaged the class. Her teaching style was interactive and encouraging, drawing out answers from even the most reluctant participants. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, students lingered, reluctant to leave. Miss Jackson, Ms. Carter called as Amara packed up her books. Could I speak with you for a moment? Amara approached the desk, curious but slightly apprehensive. Ms. Carter waited until the other students had filed out before speaking. I wanted to introduce myself properly, she said, her voice warm. I know these past few days have been challenging for you. Amara nodded, unsure what to say. I also wanted to thank you, Ms. Carter continued. What you've done, standing up for yourself, pushing for change, it matters a lot. You're welcome, Amara replied automatically, then felt silly for the formal response. Ms. Carter smiled. I started teaching 3 years ago at a school across town. I had a student, a brilliant young girl with hair like mine. She touched one of her locks. The administration constantly pressured her to change her hair, said it was unprofessional. I tried to advocate for her, but as a new teacher, my voice didn't carry much weight. She paused, meeting Amara's eyes directly. That student eventually transferred schools because of the harassment. I've always regretted not fighting harder for her. When I heard about your story, I immediately applied for this position. I wanted to be part of a school that's learning to do better. Amara felt a rush of emotion, pride mixed with a deep sense of responsibility. We still have a long way to go, she said. Yes, we do, Ms. Carter agreed. But change has to start somewhere. And thanks to you, it's starting here. As Amara left the classroom, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Ms. Carter's words had reminded her that this wasn't just about one incident or one teacher. It was about creating an environment where every student could feel safe and respected. That afternoon, Amara attended the first meeting of the Student Cultural Awareness Committee, a group she had proposed as part of the school's reform efforts. Principal Warner had agreed to establish the committee, composed of students from diverse backgrounds who would provide input on school policies and organize educational events throughout the year. The meeting was held in the library, with Ms. Carter serving as the faculty advisor. 12 students from various grades had volunteered, including Jessica Whitman, the girl who had given Amara the petition, and Malik Johnson, a quiet 8th grader who had experienced his own share of discriminatory treatment. I think we should start by reviewing the current dress code, Amara suggested once everyone had introduced themselves. The administration is revising it, and they've asked for our input. Good idea, Ms. Carter said, distributing copies of the existing policy. What specific changes do you think are needed? For the next hour, the students dissected the document, identifying vague language that could be used to target certain groups and suggesting more inclusive alternatives. Amara took notes on her laptop, compiling their recommendations into a formal proposal. The energy in the room was electric. Students who had previously felt powerless now actively shaping the policies that would govern their school experience. This is really happening, Jessica whispered to Amara as they wrapped up the meeting. We're actually being heard. Amara smiled, but her mind was already moving to the next steps. Making changes at Westfield was important, but it wasn't enough. There were thousands of schools across the country where similar incidents occurred daily, where children had no recourse, no General Jackson to fight their battles, no Washington Post article to amplify their voices. At home that evening, Amara found her father in his study, surrounded by papers and speaking on the phone. She waited patiently in the doorway until he noticed her and motioned for her to enter. Yes, Senator. I appreciate your support on this. Absolutely. I'll have my aide send over the draft language tomorrow. Thank you, sir. He ended the call and turned to Amara with a tired smile. How was school today, sweetheart? Good, Amara said, sitting in the leather chair across from his desk. We had our first committee meeting. The students have a lot of great ideas. I'm not surprised, General Jackson replied. Young people often see solutions that adults miss because they're too busy defending the status quo. Amara nodded, fidgeting with the edge of her head wrap. She had continued wearing them, transforming what had begun as a necessity into a statement of cultural pride. Today's wrap was emerald green with gold accents, elegantly framing her face. Dad, I've been thinking, she began. What we're doing at Westfield is important, but it's just one school. What about all the other kids who don't have parents like you and Mom? Who's fighting for them? General Jackson leaned back in his chair, regarding his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. That's a big question, Amara, and it's one I've been wrestling with myself. He gestured to the papers on his desk. I've been working with some colleagues in Congress on legislation that would provide clearer federal protections against discrimination in schools, including specific provisions regarding cultural hairstyles. It's based on the Crown Act that's already law in some states. The Crown Act? Amara asked. Creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, he explained. It prohibits discrimination based on hair texture and protective hairstyles. Several states have passed versions of it, but we need federal legislation to protect all students. Amara's eyes widened. You're trying to change the law because of what happened to me? Not just because of you, her father corrected gently. Because what happened to you happens to thousands of children every year. Your experience has given us an opportunity to shine a light on this issue, but the fight was always bigger than just our family. Amara absorbed this information, her mind racing with possibilities. Could I help? Maybe share my story at a hearing or something? General Jackson studied his daughter carefully. It would mean more public attention, more scrutiny. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm not sure, Amara admitted, but I think it's important. If telling my story can help other kids, then I want to do it. Before General Jackson could respond, Diana appeared in the doorway, her expression unusually tense. James, Amara, you need to see this. They followed her to the living room, where the local news was playing. On screen, Jennifer Peterson stood outside her home, surrounded by microphones and cameras. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture defensive as she addressed the reporters. I have dedicated my life to education, she was saying, her voice trembling slightly. 23 years of service to this community, and I've been vilified, threatened, and terminated without due process because of one mistake. The camera zoomed in on her face as she continued. Yes, I crossed a line with Amara Jackson. I deeply regret my actions and have attempted to apologize to her and her family, but the response has been completely disproportionate. My entire career has been destroyed. My reputation has been ruined. I've received death threats, all because I enforced a school policy. Amara felt a cold knot form in her stomach as Peterson went on, painting herself as the victim, suggesting that the response to her actions had been excessive, even racially motivated against her as a white teacher. She's trying to flip the narrative, Diana said, her attorney's mind already analyzing the potential damage. Make herself the victim instead of the perpetrator. General Jackson's jaw tightened as Peterson claimed she had been singled out, while other teachers who had enforced similar policies faced no consequences. This is a calculated move, he said. She's laying groundwork for a wrongful termination lawsuit. Amara couldn't take her eyes off the screen, watching as the woman who had humiliated her now sought public sympathy. She said she tried to apologize, she said quietly. She never apologized to me. The news cut to a statement from the teachers' union representative who expressed concern about the precedent set by Mrs. Peterson's termination without a full investigation and promised to support our member in seeking appropriate redress. When the segment ended, Diana muted the television and turned to her family. We need to be prepared for backlash, she said. There will be people who believe her version of events who think we've overreacted. Let them, General Jackson replied firmly. We know the truth, the school knows the truth, and we have the testimonials from other students to prove this wasn't an isolated incident. But Amara had gone quiet, the reality of what they were facing sinking in. This wasn't going to be a simple victory. Mrs. Peterson wasn't going to disappear quietly. The fight was far from over. What does this mean for the changes at school? She asked finally. Will the dress code revisions still happen? The cultural sensitivity training? Absolutely, Diana assured her. The district has made legally binding commitments. Mrs. Peterson's attempts to rehabilitate her image don't change that. Amara nodded, but a new worry had taken root. If Mrs. Peterson could twist the narrative so easily, casting herself as the victim of an overreaction, how many others would do the same when confronted with their own discriminatory behavior? How much resistance would they face as they pushed for broader changes? As if reading her thoughts, General Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder. This was never going to be easy, Amara. Real change never is. There will always be those who fight to maintain the status quo, who refuse to acknowledge harm they've caused. Our job is to keep speaking truth, keep pushing forward, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself. I know, she said, and I'm still ready to fight. I just didn't expect it to be so complicated. Diana smiled sadly. That's the hardest lesson in advocacy, baby. It's never as straightforward as it should be, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. As her parents discussed strategy for responding to Peterson's statements, Amara returned to her room, pulling out her journal. She had been documenting her experiences since the incident, finding that writing helped her process the complex emotions. Today's entry began differently than the others. I thought winning meant it was over, she wrote. But I'm learning that there's no such thing as over when it comes to fighting for justice. There's just the next battle, and the one after that. And somehow, I have to find the strength for all of them. The backlash began slowly, then gathered momentum like a wave building offshore. It started with comments on news articles, anonymous voices questioning whether the punishment fit the crime, suggesting that the Jackson family had used their considerable influence to destroy a dedicated teacher's career. Then came the opinion pieces in conservative publications, framing the incident as political correctness gone too far and painting Mrs. Peterson as a scapegoat. By the following week, a small but vocal group of parents had formed outside Westfield Academy, holding signs that read, "Support our teachers and due process matters." Local news crews filmed as they delivered a petition to Principal Warner's office, demanding Mrs. Peterson's reinstatement pending a fair and impartial investigation. They're acting like she's some kind of martyr, Zoe said, watching the protest from the school library window. It's disgusting. Amara remained silent, struggling to process this unexpected development. She had naively believed that once people knew what Mrs. Peterson had done, there would be universal condemnation. The reality was far more complicated. People don't like having their worldview challenged, Ms. Carter explained during an after-school meeting of the Student Cultural Awareness Committee. When someone points out discrimination or bias, the instinct for many is to defend the status quo rather than examine their own beliefs and behaviors. But she cut my hair, Amara said quietly. How can anyone defend that? They minimize it, Jessica offered. My mom overheard someone at the grocery store saying it was just a haircut and that you were being dramatic. Amara felt a flash of anger. Just a haircut. She held me down. She humiliated me. Her voice broke, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. Ms. Carter placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. And that's exactly why what you're doing is so important, Amara. People need to understand that it wasn't just anything. It was an assault. It was a violation of your dignity and your bodily autonomy. Malik, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. My cousin goes to Eastern High. Their principal sent out an email defending Mrs. Peterson, saying she was a victim of cancel culture. He told the teachers to be careful because now students could end their careers if they enforced any rules against certain groups. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about Mrs. Peterson or Westfield Academy anymore. The incident was being weaponized to maintain the very systems of inequality they were trying to dismantle. So what do we do? Jessica asked, looking to Amara. Amara hesitated, feeling the weight of their expectations. She was 13, not a seasoned activist or strategist. But she was also the daughter of General and Diana Jackson, and she had absorbed more than a few lessons about confronting difficult situations. "We stick to the facts," she said finally. "We keep telling the truth, and we don't get distracted from the real work we need to do." That evening, Amara found her parents and Aunt Vivian huddled around the dining table reviewing documents. The atmosphere was tense, their faces grave as they looked up at her. "What's wrong?" Amara asked, setting her backpack down. Diana sighed, pushing a legal document toward her. "Mrs. Peterson has filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against the district. She's also suing us personally for defamation." "Defamation?" Amara repeated, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "But everything we said was true." "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation," Vivian confirmed, "which is why this lawsuit is going nowhere. It's a publicity stunt designed to garner sympathy and pressure the district into settling with her." General Jackson's expression was thunderous. "She claims we've damaged her reputation beyond repair, that we've painted her as a racist when she was simply enforcing school policy." "But the policy didn't say she could cut my hair," Amara protested. "Exactly," Vivian agreed. "That's why this is a nuisance suit, but it's a strategic one. She's trying to shift the narrative, make herself the victim." Diana reached for Amara's hand. "Unfortunately, it's working to some extent. Her interviews have been getting traction, especially in certain media circles. She's positioned herself as a dedicated educator whose career was destroyed by an overreaction to a momentary lapse in judgment." Amara felt sick. The memory of that day, Mrs. Peterson's hand gripping her arm, the cold metal of the scissors against her scalp, the chunks of hair falling to the floor, was still vivid, still raw. To hear it described as a momentary lapse was beyond infuriating. "What do we do?" she asked, unconsciously echoing Jessica's question from earlier. "We fight back," General Jackson said firmly, "not by lowering ourselves to her level, but by continuing to speak truth. And we have an opportunity to do just that." He slid a letter across the table. It was from the office of Senator Elaine Martinez, chair of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. "The senator is holding hearings next month on discrimination in educational settings," he explained. "She's invited you to testify about your experience." Amara stared at the letter, her heart racing. "Testify? Like in front of Congress?" "A Senate committee," Diana corrected. "It's a big platform, Amara. Your story would be part of the official congressional record, potentially influencing federal legislation." "It would also mean significant media attention," Vivian cautioned, "more than you've experienced so far. And given Mrs. Peterson's lawsuit and the backlash that's brewing, you'd likely face tough questions, possibly even hostile ones." Amara swallowed hard. The thought of sitting before a panel of senators, cameras recording her every word, was intimidating enough. The prospect of facing hostile questioning about the most traumatic experience of her life was terrifying. "You don't have to decide right now," Diana assured her. "And if you choose not to do it, we'll all understand completely." Amara nodded, taking the letter to read more carefully. As her parents and aunt resumed their discussion of legal strategy, she retreated to the living room, thoughts swirling. Her phone buzzed with a notification, another news alert about the case. She hesitated, then opened it. The headline made her stomach drop. "Teacher in haircutting case speaks out. My life has been destroyed." The article featured a lengthy interview with Mrs. Peterson, who claimed she had received death threats and been forced to move out of her home. She described herself as devastated by the incident and insisted she had only been trying to enforce the school's policy against distracting hairstyles. "I admit I crossed a line," Peterson was quoted as saying. but the punishment has far exceeded the crime. The Jackson family has used their considerable power and connections to make an example of me, and I've lost everything as a result." Amara closed the app, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. How had this happened? How had the woman who assaulted her managed to reframe the narrative so effectively? And how could Amara counter this without seeming like the powerful, vindictive figure Peterson was portraying her to be? The answer came from an unexpected source. As Amara sat wrestling with these questions, her phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from an unknown number. "Hi, Amara. You don't know me, but my name is Tiana Roberts. Mrs. Peterson cut my hair in 2019 when I was at Westfield. No one believed me when I reported it. I'm ready to tell my story if it will help. There are others too." Amara stared at the message, her heart pounding. She quickly took the phone to her parents, showing them the text. "Can this be real?" she asked. Diana took the phone, studying the message carefully. "It's certainly possible. The petition you received mentioned other incidents, though none as severe as yours." "If it's true, it changes everything," General Jackson said. "It establishes a pattern of behavior that the district ignored for years." Vivian was already reaching for her laptop. "Let me see if I can find any record of a Tiana Roberts at Westfield. If she's legitimate, we should arrange to meet her as soon as possible." Within an hour, they had confirmed that Tiana Roberts had indeed been a student at Westfield Academy from 2017 to 2019 and was now a sophomore at a high school across town. With Diana's help, Amara crafted a careful response, suggesting they meet in person with their parents present. The following Saturday, the Jackson family welcomed Tiana and her mother, Charlene Roberts, into their home. Tiana was a slender girl of 15, with close-cropped hair and serious eyes that darted nervously around the room as introductions were made. "Thank you for reaching out," Amara said once they were settled in the living room. "I was beginning to think I was the only one." Tiana shook her head. "You're not. Not even close." She took a deep breath. "When I was in 7th grade, I came to school with box braids. No beads, nothing fancy, just braids. Mrs. Peterson said they were gang-related and gave me the choice to take them out or go to in-school suspension." Charlene's expression hardened at the memory. "I couldn't miss work to pick her up, so Tiana went to the bathroom and tried to undo the braids herself. When she couldn't get them all out, Mrs. Peterson took scissors and cut some of them off. I reported it to Principal Warner," Tiana continued. "He said there wasn't enough evidence that she had malicious intent. It was my word against hers, and they chose to believe her." "I wanted to fight it," Charlene added, "but I'm a single mom working 2 jobs. I didn't have the resources or connections that your family has." There was no accusation in her tone, just a statement of fact. "We transferred Tiana to another school the next year." "I'm so sorry that happened to you," Diana said, her voice gentle. "And I'm sorry the system failed you." "When I saw what happened to Amara on the news, I knew I had to speak up," Tiana said. "And I'm not the only one. I've been in touch with 4 other former students who had similar experiences with Mrs. Peterson, not all of them haircutting, but all targeting students of color for dress code or behavior violations that white students got away with." General Jackson leaned forward. "Would you and these other students be willing to make formal statements? It could be crucial in countering Mrs. Peterson's lawsuit and supporting the policy changes we're trying to implement." Tiana nodded without hesitation. "That's why I'm here. I don't want what happened to me and Amara to happen to anyone else." As the adults discussed logistics, Amara and Tiana moved to the kitchen, finding a moment of privacy. "I should have spoken up sooner," Tiana said, her voice low. "Maybe if I had, what happened to you could have been prevented." "It's not your fault," Amara assured her. "You were just a kid. The adults were supposed to protect you." Tiana smiled sadly. "I'm still just a kid. We both are. but I guess sometimes kids have to fight battles that adults won't. Something shifted in Amara's perspective. Looking at Tiana, who had endured the same humiliation but without the support system Amara had, she realized just how privileged her position was. Her parents had connections, resources, influence. They could make people listen. Most children didn't have those advantages. In that moment, Amara made her decision about Senator Martinez's invitation. She would testify, not just for herself, but for Tiana and all the others who had been silenced. If her voice could help create protections for students who didn't have generals and attorneys for parents, then she had a responsibility to use it. When she returned to the living room and announced her decision, her parents exchanged concerned glances. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Diana asked. "It won't be easy." "I'm sure," Amara replied, her gaze meeting Tiana's. "Some battles are worth fighting, even when they're hard." As the Roberts family prepared to leave, promises of further collaboration exchanged, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. Mrs. Peterson's attempts to rewrite history, to cast herself as the victim, would not go unchallenged. The truth would be told, not just Amara's truth, but the collective truth of all those who had suffered in silence. This was no longer just about a haircut. It was about breaking a cycle of discrimination that had been allowed to persist for far too long. And Amara Jackson, 13 years old and still growing into her power, was ready to lead the charge. The weeks leading up to the Senate hearing transformed the Jackson home into a command center once again. The dining room table disappeared beneath stacks of documents, testimonials from former students, statistics on disciplinary disparities in schools across the country, drafts of Amara's testimony. The living room became a mock hearing chamber, with chairs arranged to mimic the committee layout and family members taking turns playing skeptical senators. "Remember," Diana coached as Amara practiced her opening statement for the 5th time that evening, "you're speaking not just to the senators but to the American public. Keep your focus on the bigger picture. This isn't about punishing Mrs. Peterson anymore. It's about changing the system that protected her behavior for years." Amara nodded, taking a sip of water before starting again. "My name is Amara Jackson. I am 13 years old and a student at Westfield Academy in Virginia. On October 15th, my teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Peterson, forcibly cut my hair against my will, claiming that my braided hairstyle with beads violated the school's dress code." As she continued, her voice grew steadier, more confident. She had rehearsed this statement countless times, refining it with input from her parents, Aunt Vivian, and even Senator Martinez's staff. The goal was to be clear, concise, and compelling without appearing coached or scripted. "Good," General Jackson said when she finished. "But I think you should include Tiana's story as well and mention the other students who have come forward. It's important for the committee to understand that this wasn't an isolated incident." "I'm planning to bring that up during questioning," Amara replied. "Ms. Reynolds said it would have more impact that way." Ms. Reynolds was the committee staff member who had been helping prepare Amara for her appearance. Diana smiled proudly. Her daughter was thinking strategically, anticipating how best to present information for maximum effect, a skill many adults never mastered. "Let's take a break," she suggested, noting the fatigue in Amara's eyes. "You've been at this for hours." While Amara rested, Diana and the general continued their own preparations. The Peterson lawsuit was proceeding, with preliminary hearings scheduled for the following month. Vivian had assembled a formidable legal team, confident that the case would ultimately be dismissed, but the process would be draining and potentially damaging in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, more former students had come forward with their own stories of discriminatory treatment at Mrs. Peterson's hands. Tiana had organized a group of 7 students spanning the past 5 years, each with documented incidents of disproportionate discipline or humiliation. Their testimonials painted a clear picture of a teacher who consistently targeted students of color for infractions that white students routinely got away with. "We should have known," Diana said quietly as she reviewed the statements. "All these years, all these children, and no one connected the dots." "People saw what they wanted to see," General Jackson replied. "A strict teacher maintaining order, not a woman systematically humiliating children who looked like her daughter." The morning before they were set to leave for Washington, Amara's phone buzzed with a notification. She had been avoiding social media since Mrs. Peterson's lawsuit was filed, finding the constant debate about her experience too draining. But this alert came from the messaging app she used to communicate with the other students who had come forward. "Turn on Channel 4 now," Tiana had written. Amara grabbed the remote and switched to the local news, her heart sinking as Mrs. Peterson's face filled the screen. She was standing outside the district courthouse, surrounded by supporters holding signs with slogans like "Stand with Jennifer" and "Teaching is not a crime." Tomorrow, Amara Jackson will testify before the Senate, continuing her family's campaign to destroy my reputation and livelihood, Peterson was saying, her voice thick with emotion. "But what the senators won't hear is how this crusade has affected me and my family. I've received death threats. I've had to move in with relatives because protesters surrounded my home. My husband's business has lost clients. My own children have been bullied at school." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "All because of a mistake. A serious mistake, yes, but one that I've apologized for repeatedly. I never meant to hurt Amara. I was enforcing a policy that I believed was clear about distracting hairstyles. I crossed a line in how I enforced it, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But does one error in judgment deserve this level of punishment? Does it justify destroying a person's entire life?" The camera panned to show a group of teachers standing behind her, many wearing buttons that read, "I support Mrs. P." The president of the local teachers' union stepped forward. "What message are we sending to educators when one mistake can end a 23-year career? When following school policies, however imperfectly, leads to public vilification? Teachers across this district are watching this case closely, and many are afraid. Afraid that an accusation of bias, founded or unfounded, could end their careers too." Amara muted the television, her hands shaking slightly. Diana appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "I saw," she said simply, sitting beside Amara on the couch. "Are you okay?" "She said she apologized repeatedly," Amara said, her voice tight. "She's never apologized to me, not once." Diana wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "That's because this isn't about you for her. It's about her image, her career. A real apology would require her to acknowledge what she did and why she did it." "Why did she do it?" Amara asked, the question that had haunted her for weeks finally surfacing. "I still don't understand." Diana was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "I think," she said finally, "that Mrs. Peterson has spent her entire career believing she has the right to control black bodies, how they move, how they speak, how they look. When you came in with your braids, proud and confident, something in her couldn't tolerate it. She needed to put you in your place, to assert her authority over your self-expression." "But why me specifically?" Amara pressed. "There are other black students at Westfield." "Because you never seemed afraid of her," Diana suggested. "The other students she targeted, they were intimidated by her authority. You questioned things respectfully but confidently. People like Mrs. Peterson can't stand to be questioned, especially by those they consider beneath them." Amara absorbed this, finding a certain clarity in her mother's explanation. It didn't excuse what Mrs. Peterson had done, but it helped make sense of it. "She's trying to make tomorrow about her," Amara said, nodding toward the television where Peterson was still speaking, though silently now. about how she's suffered. That's exactly what she's doing, Diana agreed. And the best response is to keep the focus where it belongs, on the students who were harmed, on the system that allowed it to happen, and on the changes needed to prevent it from happening again. That evening, as Amara packed for the trip to Washington, she received a surprise visit. Jessica, Malik, and 4 other members of the Student Cultural Awareness Committee arrived at the Jackson home, bearing a handmade card signed by dozens of Westfield students. "We wanted to wish you luck tomorrow," Jessica explained as they gathered in the living room, "and to let you know that we're all behind you." Malik, usually so quiet, spoke up. "We're going to be watching the hearing at school. Principal Warner approved a special assembly so students can see it live." "Really?" Amara was surprised. Warner had been supportive of the reforms, but had seemed eager to put the entire incident behind the school as quickly as possible. Ms. Carter convinced him it was an educational opportunity, Jessica explained with a grin. Something about civic engagement and witnessing democracy in action. One of the other students, a 6th grader named David, handed Amara a small package. "This is from all of us," he said shyly. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a raised fist, the symbol of resistance and solidarity. "To remind you that you're not fighting alone," Jessica said, as Amara slipped it onto her wrist. The support of her peers fortified Amara's resolve. That night, as she made final revisions to her testimony, she added a new paragraph at the end. "I am fortunate. I have parents who fight for me, resources that many families lack, and a platform that most children never receive. But this isn't just my story. It's the story of Tiana Roberts, whose hair was cut 2 years before mine. It's the story of Marcus Webb, who was suspended for a dress code violation that white students routinely got away with. It's the story of countless children across this country who face discrimination in the very places that should be nurturing their potential. I'm here today because they deserve to be heard too." The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day in Washington, D.C. Amara stood at the hotel window, gazing out at the Capitol dome gleaming in the distance. In a few hours, she would be sitting before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, telling her story to the nation. The thought was terrifying, and yet, as she fastened the silver bracelet around her wrist and carefully arranged her head wrap, royal purple today, to match her conservative but stylish dress, she felt surprisingly calm. When they arrived at the Senate office building, they were met by one of Senator Martinez's aides, who escorted them through security and to a private room where they could wait until the hearing began. "There's been significant media interest," the aide explained. "Senator Martinez wanted to ensure you had some privacy before your testimony." "Thank you," Diana said, straightening Amara's collar one last time. "Is there anything else we should know before we go in?" The aide hesitated. "There have been some developments since yesterday. Mrs. Peterson has supporters on the committee, particularly Senator Whitford from Ohio. He's likely to ask pointed questions." "We expected that," General Jackson said. "Amara is prepared." "There's more," the aide continued. "Mrs. Peterson is here. She's not scheduled to testify, but Senator Whitford insisted she be allowed to attend." Amara's stomach tightened. She had prepared for hostile questioning, for having her experience challenged or minimized, but she hadn't anticipated facing Mrs. Peterson directly, having to speak about the traumatic experience with its perpetrator in the room. Diana looked alarmed. "Is that necessary, given the nature of the incident and Amara's age?" "Unfortunately, the hearings are public," the aide explained apologetically. "We can't exclude someone unless they're disruptive." General Jackson knelt before Amara, meeting her eyes directly. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "We can withdraw right now if you're not comfortable." Amara took a deep breath, thinking of the bracelet on her wrist, of Tiana and the others who had come forward, of all the children who never had the chance to tell their stories. "I'm doing it," she said firmly. "She took my hair. She doesn't get to take my voice too." 20 minutes later, Amara sat at the witness table, a microphone in front of her, facing the semicircle of senators on the raised dais. Cameras flashed as she arranged her notes, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. From the corner of her eye, she could see Mrs. Peterson sitting in the gallery, 3 rows back, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Amara felt a flicker of the same fear she had experienced in the nurse's office that day. But then she remembered the words her father had whispered just before they entered the hearing room. "Stand tall. Remember who you are." As Senator Martinez called the hearing to order, Amara straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She was Amara Jackson, daughter of General James and Diana Jackson, a student, a friend, a survivor. And today, she was also a voice for change. "Ms. Jackson," Senator Martinez said warmly, "thank you for being here today. Whenever you're ready, please begin your testimony." Amara leaned toward the microphone, her voice clear and unwavering as she began to tell her story, not just for herself but for all those who had never been heard. "My name is Amara Jackson. I am 13 years old and a student at Westfield Academy in Virginia." The hearing room fell silent as Amara's voice, steady despite her nerves, carried through the microphones. Senators leaned forward in their seats, staffers paused their note-taking, and cameras focused on the poised young girl in the royal purple head wrap. "On October 15th, my teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Peterson, forcibly cut my hair against my will, claiming that my braided hairstyle with beads violated the school's dress code. She physically restrained me in the nurse's office while she cut off my braids, ignoring my protests and tears." Amara paused, taking a careful breath before continuing. She had rehearsed this testimony dozens of times, but saying the words in this formal setting, with Mrs. Peterson watching from the gallery, brought the trauma rushing back with unexpected force. The dress code at Westfield Academy prohibited distracting hairstyles but did not specifically mention braids or beads. I had carefully reviewed the policy before choosing my hairstyle. When Mrs. Peterson confronted me, I offered to remove the beads, but she refused this solution. Instead, she took me to the nurse's office where she cut off my braids close to my scalp, leaving my hair uneven and damaged. As Amara described the incident in detail, several senators visibly reacted. Senator Martinez pressing her lips together in a thin line, Senator Whitford shifting uncomfortably in his seat, a female senator in the back row reaching up to touch her own hair in an unconscious gesture of solidarity. This was not about a dress code violation. This was about control and humiliation. Mrs. Peterson didn't just cut my hair. She cut away a piece of my identity, my culture, and my self-worth. And I later learned that I wasn't her first victim. Amara's voice gained strength as she moved to the testimonials she had collected. Tiana Roberts, a former Westfield student, experienced almost identical treatment in 2019. When Tiana came to school with box braids, Mrs. Peterson called them gang-related and eventually cut them off when Tiana couldn't remove them herself. Tiana reported the incident, but the administration took no action. 5 other former students have come forward with similar stories of discriminatory treatment by Mrs. Peterson, specifically targeting their cultural hairstyles or expression. The revelation caused a ripple of murmurs through the gallery. This information had not been widely reported in the media coverage of the case. What happened to me was not an isolated incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was part of a pattern of behavior that went unchecked for years because the system protected the teacher instead of the students. Amara glanced briefly at her parents, drawing strength from their encouraging nods before continuing. "I am fortunate I have parents who fight for me, resources that many families lack, and a platform that most children never receive. But this isn't just my story. It's the story of Tiana Roberts, whose hair was cut 2 years before mine. It's the story of Marcus Webb, who was suspended for a dress code violation that white students routinely got away with. It's the story of countless children across this country who face discrimination in the very places that should be nurturing their potential. I'm here today because they deserve to be heard too. She folded her hands on the table, the silver bracelet catching the light. Thank you for the opportunity to share my experience. I hope it contributes to meaningful change that will protect all students regardless of their appearance, culture, or background. A heavy silence followed as her testimony concluded. Senator Martinez, chairing the committee, was the first to speak. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for your powerful testimony. Your courage in coming forward is commendable. She adjusted her glasses before continuing. We'll now proceed to questions from the committee. Senator Wallace, you have 5 minutes. A gray-haired senator leaned toward his microphone. Ms. Jackson, in your testimony you mentioned that other students had similar experiences with Mrs. Peterson. Were these incidents ever reported to school administration? Yes, Senator, Amara replied. Tiana Roberts reported her incident directly to Principal Warner. The other students filed complaints through their parents or guidance counselors. As far as we know, no formal disciplinary action was ever taken. And why do you think that is? Senator Wallace pressed. Amara considered the question carefully. I believe there are several reasons. First, these incidents were often treated as isolated cases rather than being recognized as part of a pattern. Second, there seems to be a tendency to defer to teachers in disciplinary matters even when their actions clearly cross a line. And third, she hesitated, then decided to speak her full truth. I think bias has played a role in whose complaints were taken seriously. Senator Wallace nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for your candor. The questioning continued, with most senators asking respectful, probing questions about the incident, the school's response, and Amara's thoughts on potential policy solutions. Then came Senator Whitford's turn. Ms. Jackson, he began, his tone markedly different from the others. I want to be clear that what happened to you is regrettable, but I'm concerned about the proportionality of the response. Mrs. Peterson has lost her job, her reputation, and according to her testimony, has received death threats. Do you think that's a fair outcome for what you yourself described as a dress code enforcement gone wrong? Diana stiffened in her seat behind Amara, but General Jackson placed a restraining hand on her arm. This was Amara's moment, and they had prepared her for exactly this kind of questioning. With respect, Senator, Amara replied, her voice calm but firm. I did not describe it as a dress code enforcement gone wrong. I described it as an assault, which is what it was. Mrs. Peterson physically restrained me and cut off my hair against my will. That goes far beyond enforcing a dress code. Senator Whitford frowned. But the dress code did prohibit distracting hairstyles, correct? The dress code used the word distracting without defining it, which allowed for subjective interpretation, Amara clarified. More importantly, no dress code permits a teacher to physically alter a student's appearance by force. And yet, teachers confiscate items that violate dress codes all the time, Whitford countered. Hats, jewelry, inappropriate shirts. My hair is not an item, Senator, Amara interrupted, a rare flash of emotion breaking through her composed exterior. It's part of my body. It's connected to my cultural identity. Taking scissors to a child's hair without consent isn't confiscation. It's assault. A murmur of approval rippled through parts of the gallery. Senator Whitford seemed taken aback by the response, clearly not having expected such articulate pushback from a 13-year-old. One final question, he said, his tone slightly less confrontational. You mentioned that Mrs. Peterson has never apologized to you. Would a sincere apology make any difference in how you view this situation? Amara took a moment to consider this. An apology would have meant something immediately after the incident, she said finally. But now, after Mrs. Peterson has publicly minimized what she did and portrayed herself as the victim, I don't believe any apology would be sincere. What would make a difference is seeing real change, policies that protect students from this kind of treatment, accountability for educators who cross the line, and a commitment to addressing the biases that allow these incidents to happen in the first place. Senator Whitford nodded stiffly and yielded his time. The remaining questions were largely supportive, with senators from both parties expressing concern about the lack of accountability in the school system and the need for clearer protections for students. As the hearing concluded, Senator Martinez thanked Amara again for her testimony. Your voice has been instrumental in bringing this important issue to national attention. I hope you know that your courage today will help protect other students from similar experiences. Cameras flashed as Amara stood, gathering her notes. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of Mrs. Peterson hurrying from the gallery, her face unreadable. For a brief moment, Amara felt a twinge of something unexpected, not satisfaction or vindication, but a complicated mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. Outside the hearing room, reporters crowded the hallway, shouting questions and thrusting microphones forward. General Jackson stepped in front of Amara protectively, while Diana addressed the press with practiced poise. My daughter has said everything she needed to say in her testimony. We have no further comment at this time. As they made their way through the throng, guided by Senator Martinez's staff, Amara's phone buzzed continuously in her pocket. Messages from friends who had watched the hearing live, from Tiana and the other former students, from classmates at the Westfield Assembly. You were amazing. You showed them, Amara. Thank you for speaking for all of us. When they finally reached the private room where they had prepared earlier, Amara sank into a chair, the adrenaline that had carried her through the testimony suddenly evaporating. You did it, sweetheart, Diana said, kneeling beside her. I am so proud of you. General Jackson squeezed her shoulder. That was a masterclass in grace under pressure, Amara. The way you handled Senator Whitford's questions, I couldn't have done better myself. Amara managed a tired smile. Can we go home now? Soon, Diana promised. There's just one more thing. She nodded to one of Senator Martinez's aides, who opened the door to admit the senator herself. Martinez approached Amara with genuine warmth. Ms. Jackson, I wanted to personally thank you for your testimony today. It was powerful, articulate, and exactly what this committee needed to hear. She glanced at General Jackson. And I wanted you to know that I've spoken with several of my colleagues who were moved by your words. We're drafting legislation that would provide explicit federal protections for cultural hairstyles in schools and workplaces nationwide. If passed, it would be the most comprehensive version of the Crown Act to date. Amara's eyes widened. Really? Really? Martinez confirmed. And we'd like to name it the Amara Act. The unexpected honor brought tears to Amara's eyes. I don't know what to say. You've said plenty already, Martinez smiled. Now it's our turn to act. As they drove back to their hotel, the city passing in a blur outside the car windows, Amara was quiet, processing the events of the day. Her testimony had gone better than she could have hoped. She had remained composed, articulate, and had effectively countered the attempts to minimize what had happened to her. But there was an emptiness in the aftermath, a sense that something remained unresolved. What's on your mind, kiddo? General Jackson asked, noticing her pensive expression. I just keep thinking about Mrs. Peterson, Amara admitted. When she left the hearing room, she looked, I don't know, not angry exactly, more like defeated. That's not your burden to carry, Diana said gently. Whatever Mrs. Peterson is feeling now is the result of her own actions, not yours. I know, Amara sighed, but I still don't understand why she did it. Even after everything, all the testimony and the hearings and the media coverage, I still don't really know why she cut my hair that day." General Jackson exchanged a glance with Diana in the rearview mirror. "Some questions don't have satisfying answers, Amara. People's motivations are complex, often rooted in biases they don't even recognize in themselves." "Maybe," Amara conceded. "But I feel like if I understood why, I could make more sense of it all." When they reached the hotel, they found Vivian waiting for them in the lobby, her expression serious. "What's wrong?" Diana asked immediately. "Mrs. Peterson has issued a statement," Vivian replied, holding up her tablet. "It's unexpected." The statement was brief but striking. "After listening to Amara Jackson's testimony today, I have made the difficult decision to withdraw my lawsuit against the Jackson family and Westfield Academy. Hearing the experiences of other students has forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my behavior and the harm I have caused. While I cannot undo the past, I can take responsibility for my actions now. I sincerely apologize to Amara Jackson and to all the students who felt targeted or humiliated by my enforcement of school policies. I am committed to educating myself about cultural sensitivity and implicit bias, and I hope that my experience serves as a cautionary tale for other educators." Amara read the statement twice, struggling to process this sudden reversal. "Do you think she means it?" she asked finally. "It doesn't matter," General Jackson replied. "What matters is that you've been heard. Your truth prevailed." But as they rode the elevator to their suite, Amara found herself wondering if maybe it did matter, if understanding could be as important as justice, if reconciliation might be as powerful as vindication. These were questions too complex for easy answers, but for the first time since that day in the nurse's office, Amara felt something like peace beginning to take root. The work wasn't finished. There were still policies to change, legislation to pass, awareness to raise. But today, in a Senate hearing room, a 13-year-old girl had spoken truth to power, and power had listened. It was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. The return to Virginia brought a welcome respite from the intensity of Washington. Amara spent the weekend recovering, sleeping late, watching movies with her parents, and ignoring the flood of interview requests that continued to pour in. By Monday morning, she felt almost ready to face school again, though the thought of walking back into Westfield after her very public testimony made her stomach flutter with nerves. "Everyone's going to be talking about it," she said as Diana drove her to school. "The whole assembly watched me testify." "They watched you stand up for what's right," Diana corrected. "That's something to be proud of, not nervous about." Amara nodded, absently touching the silver bracelet on her wrist. "I know. It's just weird being known. Before all this, I was just regular Amara." Diana glanced at her daughter, a small smile playing at her lips. "You were never just anything, baby, but I understand what you mean. Fame, even the good kind, takes some getting used to." As they pulled into the school parking lot, Amara spotted a group of students gathered near the entrance, many wearing purple, the color of her head wrap during the testimony, which had apparently become a symbol of solidarity. Zoe broke away from the group, rushing to meet Amara as she stepped out of the car. "You're basically a legend now," Zoe announced, engulfing Amara in a hug. "That senator tried to trip you up and you shut him down like a boss." Amara laughed, some of her tension easing. "I was so nervous." "It didn't show," Jessica said, joining them. "You looked like you belonged there." The others crowded around, offering congratulations and recounting their favorite moments from the testimony. As they walked into the building, Amara was surprised to see purple ribbons tied to many of the students' backpacks. "The committee organized it," Malik explained, falling into step beside her. "Purple for Amara Day." Principal Warner was waiting in the lobby, his usual stiff demeanor softened slightly. "Welcome back, Miss Jackson," he said, offering a formal nod. "The school is proud of your accomplishment." The acknowledgement, however awkward, represented significant progress from the defensive administrator who had initially tried to minimize the incident. Amara returned the nod, noting the purple pocket square peeking from his suit jacket, a small but meaningful gesture. As she made her way to her locker, students and teachers alike offered words of support or simply smiled in recognition. The attention was still uncomfortable, but there was something different about it now. It felt less like being a spectacle and more like being respected. Ms. Carter was waiting outside her classroom, beaming with pride. "There she is," she announced as Amara approached. "Our very own history maker." "I just told my story," Amara demurred, though she couldn't help but smile at the teacher's enthusiasm. "And in doing so, you've changed the conversation," Ms. Carter replied. "That's how progress happens, one brave voice at a time." The day passed in a blur of congratulations and questions, with many students curious about what Washington was like, what the senators were like in person, whether she had been scared. Amara answered patiently, gradually growing more comfortable with her role as both student and reluctant celebrity. During lunch, Principal Warner made an announcement over the intercom. The school board had unanimously approved the revised dress code policy developed with input from the Student Cultural Awareness Committee. The new policy explicitly protected cultural hairstyles and expressions and included a clear statement affirming students' right to maintain cultural identities without fear of discrimination. A cheer went up from many tables in the cafeteria, with students turning to acknowledge Amara's role in bringing about the change. She accepted their recognition with a mixture of pride and humility, aware that this tangible policy shift represented just the beginning of what needed to be done. After school, as Amara gathered books from her locker, she felt a presence behind her and turned to find Superintendent Hayes standing there, his expression unusually contrite. "Miss Jackson," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I wonder if I might have a word." Curious, Amara nodded, following him to a nearby empty classroom. Hayes closed the door before speaking again. "I watched your testimony," he began. "It was illuminating, particularly the part about other students who had similar experiences with Mrs. Peterson." "Yes," Amara said simply, waiting to see where this was going. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "I want you to know that I've initiated a comprehensive review of all disciplinary actions at Westfield over the past 5 years. We're looking for patterns, disparities, problematic practices." He paused. "The preliminary findings are troubling. There appears to be a significant disparity in how discipline has been applied across different student demographics." This didn't surprise Amara, but the fact that Hayes was acknowledging it certainly did. "I owe you an apology," he continued, "not just for what happened with Mrs. Peterson, but for the system that allowed it to happen. As superintendent, that responsibility ultimately falls to me." The apology seemed genuine, if belated. "What will you do about it?" Amara asked, more interested in action than contrition. "We're implementing a district-wide anti-bias training program, effective immediately," Hayes replied. "We're also establishing an independent review board for disciplinary actions, which will include parent and student representatives, and we're revising all dress codes and conduct policies to eliminate vague language that allows for subjective enforcement." Amara nodded, cautiously optimistic. "That sounds like a good start." "It is just a start," Hayes acknowledged. "But I wanted you to know that your advocacy has had a real impact, not just at Westfield, but throughout the district." He hesitated, then added, "Your father isn't the only one with connections in Washington. I've been in touch with several education officials who are closely following the proposed Amara Act. The mention of the legislation named after her still felt surreal. Have you heard anything about its chances?" she asked. It has bipartisan support, Hayes replied, which is rare these days. I believe it has a very good chance of passing. He offered a small smile. You've started something important, Miss Jackson. Something that will help a lot of students. As Hayes left, Amara found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. From the traumatic day in the nurse's office to policy changes, congressional testimony, and now potential federal legislation, it was almost too much to process. That evening, as the Jackson family sat down to dinner, General Jackson shared news from his contacts in Washington. The Amara Act has been formally introduced in both the House and Senate, he reported. Early indications suggest strong support, though there will be negotiations on the specifics. Will I need to testify again? Amara asked, uncertain whether she wanted to or not. Not in the immediate future, her father assured her. Your testimony last week was recorded and entered into the congressional record. It will be referenced throughout the legislative process. Diana placed a hand over Amara's. How are you feeling about all of this? It's a lot to handle at 13. Amara considered the question seriously. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, she said finally. But sometimes I wish I could just be a regular kid again, you know? Not Amara of the Amara Act. Her parents exchanged understanding glances. That's completely understandable, General Jackson said. And you have every right to step back from the public aspect of this if you want to. You've done more than enough already. I don't want to step back entirely, Amara clarified. I just need to find a balance. I still want to help make things better, but I also want to have sleepovers and worry about math tests and normal teenage stuff. That sounds very reasonable, Diana said, and very mature. The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. General Jackson went to answer it, returning moments later with a puzzled expression and an envelope in his hand. It's for you, Amara, he said, handing it to her. Hand-delivered by a young woman who didn't give her name. Amara opened the envelope curiously. Inside was a letter, handwritten on simple stationery. Dear Amara, my name is Emily Peterson. I'm Jennifer Peterson's daughter. I watched your testimony last week, and I've been trying to find the courage to reach out ever since. First, I want to say how deeply sorry I am for what my mother did to you. There is no excuse for it, and I won't try to offer any. What she did was wrong. Period. I also want you to know that your testimony changed something in her. The night after the hearing, she had a complete breakdown. She finally admitted that she has a problem with implicit bias, something our family has tried to talk to her about for years. She's starting therapy and has enrolled in a cultural sensitivity program at the community college. I don't expect this to change how you feel about her, nor should it. But I thought you deserved to know that your words had an impact, that you've caused at least one person to confront their biases in a real way. There's one more thing. My mother kept your hair, the braids she cut off. I found them in a box in her closet. I don't know why she kept them, but it seemed wrong. They belong to you, not her. If you want them back, I can arrange to return them. If not, I understand completely. Thank you for your courage. You've changed more than you know. Sincerely, Emily Peterson. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she finished reading. She passed the letter to her parents, watching their expressions shift from concern to surprise as they read. She kept my hair, Amara whispered, a chill running through her. The revelation was disturbing, adding another layer of violation to what had already been a traumatic experience. That's concerning, Diana said carefully. General Jackson's jaw tightened. What do you want to do, Amara? We can call Vivian, possibly pursue this as further evidence of... No, Amara interrupted. No more legal action. I just want to understand. She stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the darkening sky. The idea that Mrs. Peterson had kept her braids was deeply unsettling, But Emily's letter had also stirred something else, a strange sense that maybe finally there was a chance for real understanding. "I want to meet with her," Amara said suddenly. "With Emily?" Diana asked. "With Mrs. Peterson," Amara clarified. "Not alone," she added quickly, seeing her parents' alarmed expressions. "Maybe with a mediator somewhere neutral, but I want to ask her why. I want to hear it from her directly." Her parents exchanged concerned glances. "Are you sure that's what you want?" General Jackson asked. "You're under no obligation to give her that opportunity." "I know," Amara said. "This isn't for her. It's for me. I need to understand what happened if I'm ever going to fully move past it." Diana studied her daughter thoughtfully. "If this is really what you want, we'll arrange it, but only under very controlled circumstances, and only if you're absolutely certain." "I am," Amara said, surprising herself with how firm she felt about this decision. "I can't explain why, but I think it's important, not just for my own healing, but maybe for something bigger." As they discussed the logistics, who would mediate, where it would happen, what ground rules would be established, Amara felt a strange sense of calm. The idea of facing Mrs. Peterson again was intimidating, but it also offered the possibility of closure, of answering the questions that had haunted her for weeks. Later that night, Amara sat at her desk, writing in her journal. She had begun the habit after the incident, finding that putting her feelings into words helped make sense of them. Tonight's entry was different, not processing trauma, but contemplating reconciliation. "I'm not sure if forgiveness is possible," she wrote. "I'm not even sure if it's what I want. But I do want understanding. I want to look Mrs. Peterson in the eye and ask her why. I want her to see me, really see me, not as a dress code violation or a problem to be solved, but as a human being worthy of dignity and respect. Maybe that's the beginning of healing, not just for me, but for her too. And maybe that's how real change happens, one difficult conversation at a time." She closed the journal and moved to the window, gazing up at the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions. But tonight, Amara Jackson felt something she hadn't expected to feel so soon after all that had happened. A sense of possibility, of hope that even the deepest wounds could, with time and truth, begin to heal. The community center conference room was deliberately neutral territory, neither school property nor the courthouse, neither the Peterson home nor the Jackson residence. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a simple round table with 5 chairs. Dr. Elaine Winters, a respected conflict resolution specialist recommended by Aunt Vivian, arrived first to prepare the space. Then came the Jacksons, General Jackson in civilian clothes today, Diana in a casual blouse rather than her usual courtroom attire, and Amara, who had chosen to wear her hair uncovered for the first time since the incident. Ms. Patrice had worked wonders with what remained of Amara's hair, transforming the uneven patches into a stylish pixie cut that framed her face beautifully. It had been Amara's decision to come without a head wrap today, a statement that she had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Diana asked as they settled into their seats. Amara nodded, though butterflies danced in her stomach. "I'm sure." At precisely 10 o'clock, the door opened again. Jennifer Peterson entered, followed by a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to her, Emily, Amara presumed. Mrs. Peterson looked markedly different from her appearances on television or at the Senate hearing. The polished, defensive demeanor was gone, replaced by something more subdued. She wore minimal makeup, her face showing signs of stress and sleepless nights. She hesitated at the threshold, her eyes meeting Amara's briefly before darting away. Dr. Winters stood to greet them. "Mrs. Peterson, Emily, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." As they settled across the table, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Dr. Winters allowed it to stretch for a moment before speaking again. Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules. Everyone will have an opportunity to speak without interruption. We're here to listen and understand, not to accuse or defend. This is not a legal proceeding or a debate. It's a conversation aimed at healing, whatever form that might take. She turned to Amara. Since you requested this meeting, would you like to start? Amara took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say, but now, facing Mrs. Peterson directly, the prepared words felt inadequate. I have one question, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. Why? Not why you enforced the dress code, but why you cut my hair, why you held me down, why you ignored me when I cried and begged you to stop. Mrs. Peterson flinched visibly at the direct questions. For several long moments, she seemed unable to speak, her hands twisting in her lap. Emily placed a gentle hand on her mother's arm, offering silent support. I've asked myself the same questions every day since it happened, Mrs. Peterson finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I've tried to understand what came over me in that moment. She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. The easy answer would be that I was enforcing school policy, but that's not the truth, and we both know it. She looked up, meeting Amara's eyes directly for the first time. The truth is that something in me snapped that day. When you walked into my classroom with those braids, so confident, so unapologetically yourself, it triggered something I didn't know was there. What do you mean? Amara asked, genuinely wanting to understand. Mrs. Peterson sighed deeply. I grew up in a very different time and place. My parents taught me that success meant fitting in, not standing out. When I became a teacher, I carried those values with me. I believed I was helping students by teaching them to conform to what society expected. But you didn't cut white students' hair when they broke dress code, Amara pointed out, keeping her tone neutral despite the accusation in her words. No, I didn't, Mrs. Peterson admitted, and that's where I've had to confront some ugly truths about myself. I treated you differently because, unconsciously or not, I saw your expression of your culture as a challenge to the order I was trying to maintain. When you questioned me, when you pointed out that the dress code didn't specifically ban beads, it felt like defiance rather than what it actually was, a child respectfully standing up for herself. She paused, collecting herself. I'm not offering this as an excuse. There is no excuse. I'm trying to answer your question honestly, even though the answer reveals things about myself that I'm deeply ashamed of. General Jackson, who had been watching the exchange intently, spoke for the first time. You kept her hair, he said, his voice controlled but tight with emotion. You kept the braids you cut off. Why? A flush of shame colored Mrs. Peterson's face. I don't have a rational explanation for that. After what happened, after I realized what I'd done, I couldn't just throw them away. It felt disrespectful somehow. But keeping them was wrong too. I should have found a way to return them to Amara immediately. Emily reached into her bag and removed a small wooden box, placing it on the table. We brought them, she said softly, if you want them. Amara stared at the box, a complex swirl of emotions rising within her. Those braids represented hours of her mother's loving work, a birthday celebration, a connection to her heritage. They also represented violation, humiliation, trauma. After a long moment, she reached for the box, opening it carefully. Inside, neatly coiled, were her braids, the colorful beads still attached. The sight of them brought tears to her eyes, not from fresh pain, but from the strange sense of reclaiming something that had been taken from her. Thank you, she said simply, closing the box and setting it aside. Dr. Winters looked between them. Mrs. Peterson, Is there anything you'd like to say to Amara directly? Mrs. Peterson nodded, straightening in her chair. Amara, I am profoundly sorry for what I did to you. My actions were inexcusable. I violated your dignity, your bodily autonomy, and your trust. I allowed biases I didn't even recognize to guide my behavior, and in doing so, I caused you tremendous harm. Her voice shook, but she continued. Since that day, I've begun the difficult work of examining those biases, of understanding how they've influenced my teaching throughout my career. It's work I should have done decades ago. She hesitated, then added, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that your courage, in standing up to me, in testifying and sharing your story, has forced me to confront truths I've avoided my entire life. You've changed me, Amara, and through me, hopefully, you've changed how at least one teacher will interact with her students in the future. Silence fell as her words settled in the room. Amara considered them carefully, searching for any hint of the defensive posturing Mrs. Peterson had displayed in her press conferences and interviews. She found none, only a raw, uncomfortable honesty. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Amara said finally. What you did hurt me in ways that still affect me. I have nightmares sometimes. I flinch when someone stands behind me unexpectedly. I worry about how I look, if I'm too distracting or defiant just by being myself. Mrs. Peterson nodded, accepting the impact of her actions without defense. But, Amara continued, I do believe you're sorry, and I believe you're trying to change. That matters to me. She touched her short hair self-consciously. This will grow back, and maybe with time, the other wounds will heal too. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, moving beyond the initial confrontation to a deeper discussion of systemic issues. Mrs. Peterson shared insights from her cultural sensitivity training, acknowledging how policies she had enforced throughout her career had disproportionately impacted students of color. Amara spoke about the Student Cultural Awareness Committee and the changes they were implementing at Westfield. Emily, who turned out to be a graduate student in education policy, discussed her research on disparities in school discipline. By the time Dr. Winters suggested they begin wrapping up, something had shifted in the room. The tension hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something more productive, a shared commitment to learning from what had happened. I have one more question, Amara said as they prepared to leave. What will you do now? With your career, I mean. Mrs. Peterson considered the question. I don't think I should return to teaching, at least not in a traditional classroom. The harm I've caused can't be undone, but I hope to use my experience as a cautionary tale, perhaps working with teacher training programs on recognizing and addressing bias. If nothing else, I can be an example of what happens when educators fail to examine their own prejudices. As they left the community center, stepping into the bright spring sunshine, Diana put an arm around Amara's shoulders. How are you feeling? Lighter, Amara said after a moment's reflection. Not completely healed, but lighter. General Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's how healing works. Not all at once, but gradually. One conversation, one realization at a time. In the months that followed, Amara found a new rhythm to her life, balancing her ongoing advocacy work with the ordinary pleasures of being 13. Her hair grew out, inch by inch, though she often still wore colorful head wraps now as a fashion choice rather than a necessity. The Student Cultural Awareness Committee thrived under her leadership, organizing educational events and continuing to provide input on school policies. The Amara Act moved through Congress with remarkable bipartisan support, championed by Senator Martinez and several unexpected allies who had been moved by Amara's testimony. When it finally passed, the Jackson family was invited to the White House for the signing ceremony. Standing in the Rose Garden, watching as the president signed the legislation that bore her name, Amara felt a sense of completion, The Amara Act would protect students across the country from discrimination based on their hairstyles, ensuring that what had happened to her and Tiana could not legally happen to others. This legislation represents our commitment to respecting the cultural identities of all Americans, the president said, offering Amara the pen used to sign the bill into law. It ensures that no child will face discrimination simply for expressing who they are and where they come from. As cameras flashed, capturing the historic moment, Amara spotted a familiar face in the crowd of attendees, Mrs. Winters, the school nurse who had witnessed the original incident but failed to intervene effectively. She had reached out to Amara a few weeks earlier, expressing her regret and asking permission to attend the ceremony. Amara had granted it, understanding that healing extended beyond just her relationship with Mrs. Peterson. That evening, after the ceremony, the Jackson family gathered with their closest allies to celebrate. Tiana and the other former students who had come forward were there, along with Ms. Carter, Jessica, Malik, and other members of the committee. Aunt Vivian raised a toast to Amara, praising her courage and vision. "To Amara," she said, glass lifted high, "who reminded us all that justice begins with one voice willing to speak truth." Later, as the celebration wound down, Amara slipped away to the hotel balcony, gazing out at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. Her father joined her, leaning on the railing beside her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, echoing Diana's familiar phrase. Amara smiled. "I was just thinking about everything that's happened since that day in Mrs. Peterson's class. How one moment changed so much, for me, for the school, for the country." "That's how change often happens," General Jackson replied. "One moment, one decision, one person brave enough to say, 'This isn't right.'" "You should be proud, Amara. I know I am." "I am proud," she acknowledged, "but I also know we're not done. The law is important, but laws don't change hearts and minds on their own. There's still so much work to do." Her father nodded, unsurprised by her perspective. "That's true. But you've laid a foundation that others can build on, and you've inspired a generation of young people to speak up when they see injustice." Inside, Amara could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of community and solidarity. She thought about the wooden box containing her braids, which now sat on her dresser at home, not as a reminder of trauma, but as a symbol of resilience. She thought about Mrs. Peterson, who was working with a civil rights organization to develop anti-bias training for teachers. She thought about all the students who would never know what it was like to have their cultural expression forcibly removed because a law now protected them. "You know what Mom always says," Amara said, turning to her father with a smile. "Justice isn't a destination, it's a journey." General Jackson laughed softly. "She'll be pleased to know you've been listening." As they rejoined the celebration, Amara felt a profound sense of gratitude for her parents who had fought alongside her, for the friends and allies who had supported her, even for the difficult experiences that had revealed her own strength. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over. But looking around the room at the community that had formed around this cause, Amara knew she wasn't walking the path alone. 6 months later, Amara stood before the mirror in her bedroom, running her fingers through her hair, which had grown into a glorious halo of natural curls. Today was the first day of a new school year, and she had decided to wear it uncovered and unadorned, simply her natural hair, exactly as it grew from her head. As she gathered her backpack, her eyes fell on the wooden box that still sat on her dresser. Inside were the braids Mrs. Peterson had cut, preserved as a reminder of both trauma and triumph. Beside it stood a framed photograph from the White House signing ceremony, and next to that a handwritten letter from a girl in Kansas who had been the first in her school to benefit from the protections of the Amara Act. These objects told the story of her journey, from victim to advocate, from pain to purpose. But they didn't define her. What defined her were the choices she made each day to stand up for herself and others, to speak truth to power, to believe that change was possible even when the path forward seemed daunting. Amara Jackson was 14 now, a little older, a lot wiser, and completely determined to continue the work she had begun. Her father was right. She had laid a foundation. Now it was time to build.